Hey y'all, you might have come across a series of viral posts across multiple accounts on Instagram depicting beautiful art and illustrations that were used for Barbie-themed children's books back in the 90s. If you were to add up the traction these posts received, you'll see that they have garnered over a staggering 600,000 likes when added together. So it must have been millions of people who've had these posts on their feed. Why is it that these lush, otherworldly, very feminine depictions of Barbie from the past struck a chord with so many people? In this video, I wanted to take a deep dive into the world of these illustrations by not only taking a look at them in detail and checking out the history behind them, as I personally own about a dozen of the original books that included these illustrations, but I also want to take this opportunity to debunk a ton of misinformation that was spread through those social media posts, as the accounts posting them were AI slop accounts, with no deeper knowledge of Barbie history or any truthful explanation on how these illustrations came about. AI slop accounts that were repeating a false narrative to gain traction, and that were just regurgitating pictures that were already posted on other social media accounts run by passionate Barbie collectors and fans, just so that the AI slop account could generate most ad and affiliate link revenue with the least amount of effort put in. If you want to know the truth, and nothing but the truth, stay tuned. Let's start off by debunking the factoid that these illustrations were supposedly made by a design team at Mattel in California. This is absolutely false. Mattel had nothing to do with these. These artworks were made for a series of children's books put out by the publishing company Egmont from Denmark. These books were mainly meant to be released in Northern European countries. Denmark, of course, France, Germany, where these books were the most popular and successful, and who, with its own publishing company EHPA, had close ties to Egmont. Some of the books were also published in Spain and probably a few other countries in close proximity of the borders as well. The only thing that Mattel did here was to give Egmont the license and therefore free rein to use the Barbie trademark for these books. When Egmont acquired the license, they went through the roster of artists they already had working for them on magazines and comics. While the stories and content of these books were made in-house by Danish writers at Egmont, they approached Josep Tutain, a legendary Spanish comic writer, artist, agent and publisher, and one of the key figures in Spanish comic history, whose work crossed the borders and was popular in France, Germany and Great Britain, to oversee the art portion of these books. Tutain suggested another famous figure from the Spanish comic book scene, José Pepe González Navarro, to create the drawings for these books. Navarro was best known for having worked on Vampirella. As they were on a tight schedule and Egmont wanted them to deliver enough illustrations to fill up multiple books per month, and every book would need it to have about 30 illustrations, most of them double-page spreads, Tutain knew that Pepe González would have a hard time to do all the work by himself, get tired, and might eventually be fed up and quit. As Tutain was eager to keep González on board, he asked another comic book artist, Edmond Fernandez Ripoll, who had already worked on a series of comics for Barbie's biggest rival at that time, Cindy, to help him out. Ripoll was close friends with another comic book illustrator, Manfred Sommer, and asked him if he could lend a helping hand too. Finishing touches on the airbrushing to seamlessly insert the artworks into the books were made by a fourth artist. These men worked in tandem to create all illustrations for these Barbie books. The process of creating these drawings was elaborate, starting off by making pencil sketches that would eventually be traced onto canson paper made specifically for drawings, before the airbrushing would be applied on top and colored pencils would be used to create the finished version of the illustration. As Manfred Sommer was living in the region of Murcia in Spain, he would have to send his portion of the work over via mail to González and Ripoll, who both were also in different places at the time working on comic strips for different newspapers in Spain. Envelopes of drawings were sent back and forth before the artworks could be finalized and shipped over to Denmark for Egmont to put them into these books, and even then, the editors at Egmont were incredibly picky and demanding. While the artists had a lot of freedom in the way they were illustrating Barbie, they would also have to redo a lot of drawings over the smallest of details. If Barbie was riding a horse on the left side of the page, the editors would then ask for her to be on the right, and Navarro, Ripoll and Sommer would then have to redraw the whole thing. Sometimes 10 out of 30 drawings had to be redrawn. This was still an era where art and illustrations in books, comic books, and magazines were not made on personal computing devices, then mailed to the publisher digitally via the internet. Everything was handmade, hand-drawn, and hand-delivered. Part of the reason why I felt compelled to debunk the claims made in those social media posts was because those drawings were attributed to a design team at Mattel in California, whereas I think these drawings are very European, like they have a distinct flavor to them that is very European. They seem a bit more sophisticated, they're more soft. If you were to compare them to the Marvel comics that were put out for Barbie around the same time frame, which were great in their own right, which I really love, those were more overt, more brash, more in your face and over the top. So there's a differentiation between the art style that would come out from Northern America compared to the art style that would come out from here in Europe. And I would attribute it mostly to the Jose Navarro, to Pepe Gonzalez, because while this was a joint venture between multiple artists, I think the art direction was mostly spearheaded by him. Like, he had a very unique way to draw features. He loves to use side profiles, and a lot of the faces that he drew for Vampirella, when you compare them side by side to the faces that he drew for the Barbie graphic books, you can see that yes, it's his work and it's sort of like his baby. And in the book Barbie as an artist, as a painter, Pepe Gonzalez even makes an appearance, so he was more or less immortalized in this book series as a proper character. In the comment section of the social media posts, there was also a lot of talk about artists getting their dues, being credited for their work, which they weren't in these books. Reading the interview where all of the information from this video has been sourced from, it's an interview from February of 2014 that appeared on a Spanish blog site dedicated to comic books. It was an interview with Edmond Ripoll, and he said that they were pretty well compensated for their work. It was the most money he had ever made drawing sketches and artworks, illustrations for a company. Each one of them was given sort of like 10,000 pesetas per illustration, and if you were to multiply them by 30 illustrations per book, over a time span of 2 years, he mentioned in 96 and 97 they put out over 50 books. They probably made, if you were to take inflation into calculation, 50,000 euro each for working on these Barbie books. And this was their side hustle. Like, their main job and their main gig was doing the comic strips for those newspapers. They were very well compensated. And I know that this is a point of contention for a lot of people in the age of AI, but there was a different time. Like in 96 and 97, artists were giving their credit, were given the dues, were given the compensation. And it's very different nowadays, and it's very sad to think about it. So this isn't necessarily a video to give them their dues this way. I think it was more important to immortalize them now, because both Sommer as well as Pepe Gonzalez passed away quite a few years ago, and the only one who's still standing is Ripoll, who at this point is now 87 years old. So if he, God forbid, would eventually pass on to the next realm, none of the people involved in the making of these drawings would still be around and kicking, so it's important for me to highlight them in this video. With that in mind, there are a few things that I and a lot of people might consider problematic nowadays about these books, but we'll get into that. Now, when it comes to the inspiration for the aesthetic of these Barbie book illustrations, Navarro and co. clearly had access to materials provided to them by Egmont via Mattel. as a lot of real-life Barbie fashions were included in the making of these artworks. Similarly to RuPaul, who clearly was trying to redraw actual Cindy fashions and dolls released by Hasbro at the time for his Cindy comic books. On the back of one of the Barbie books, where they always introduce the characters included in the story, you can also see how they seemingly try to trace actual doll heads used at the time for Barbie, Skipper, and Ken. But aside from that, these drawings inspired by the story within these books were wholly original, and one can clearly see how Navarro and his colleagues were influenced by the biggest name in modeling at the time, especially in Northern Europe, the real-life Barbie, Claudia Schiffer. Claudia was part of a Barbie doll themed photo shoot shot by famed fashion photographer Ellen von Unwerth for the July of 1994 edition of Vogue Italia. Just a year later, in 1995, Hasbro teamed up with Claudia to release a doll in her likeness, alongside dolls made in the likeness of Karen Mulder and Naomi Campbell.
How it came about? Well, first of all, I said yes to this particular project when I realized they were giving us a lot of freedom and control. We were able to change our doll and make our doll the way we want it to be. So I was very much on top of, for example, choosing the hair color, the eye color, designing the dress. We designed our dresses ourselves. When I was younger, I have really nice memories from me when I was like 8 years old, playing with dolls and dressing them up in different outfits and so on.
So naturally, it makes sense that by 1996, when these artists were asked to create drawings of Barbie, hereby also debunking the claim that these are illustrations from the 80s, which they clearly were not, they would look to none other than Claudia for inspiration to create drawings of Barbie. If they had been making a Barbie the movie in the mid-90s, there would have been no doubt that Schiffer would have been the #1 choice to cast her in the role. As far as fashion modeling goes, Claudia, alongside Naomi Campbell, were the two biggest names that I personally remember hearing back when I was a child in the mid-90s. Both transcended the modeling stage to cross over into mainstream media, and as I grew up in Germany, we were all pretty proud of our homegrown export conquering the world stage. Claudia's marriage to David Copperfield was probably the biggest celebrity wedding to happen since Lady Di married Prince Charles in the 80s, and Claudia, while always looking immaculate and statuesque, seemed approachable and down to earth too, in a girl next door type of way. Like, if you were to fangirl in front of her, she'd give you a hug, but when you were to snap a pic with Claudia, no matter how much you thought you were serving, you'd look chopped right next to her. So it was a perfect fit for Barbie, who in these children's books were depicted similarly. She was always the star, effortlessly conquering every adventure in 6.5-inch pumps with no hair out of place, yet she also exuded an almost maternal warmth in these stories and drawings. She was equally a friend you could confide in, the sister who would give you comfort as well as the superstar you would look up to and aspire to one day become. This all encapsulates why these illustrations of Barbie were able to resonate on social media with so many people, I feel. Of course, there's currently a resurgence of women longing to reinforce gender roles to better their life by chasing a well-off man and living a domesticated life, and I'd be amiss to neglect that fact, yet I feel like it goes beyond that. Barbie is never playing second fiddle to Ken in these books. She's front and center, actively pushing the narrative forward, having a career for herself, doing things, going places. These drawings resonating with people, I wouldn't necessarily chalk it up to people longing for a soft life. If you were to read some of the comments underneath the aforementioned Instagram posts that go as follows. I swear, artists from like 15 plus years ago were putting their souls into their work. What happened to this quality of children's media? What I really love about these illustrations is that she is beautiful, glowing and confident without being objectified. Her clothes are modest, her hair is lush and pretty, but nothing about it is male gaze. The real Barbie. All of this is hand painted, no software like Illustrator or Photoshop. I love Adobe products, but this is art. When Barbie was elite. Bring true art back. There's so much love and soul in these illustrations. Now, when it comes to the contents of the stories, you might say that some of the things that are included in here might seem sort of problematic nowadays, but I would just chalk that up to that just being the times these books were released in, like in 1996. This era of children's books was very much dominated by creating a hunger and thirst for a lot of topics, sort of like dinosaurs, astrology, the planets of the universe, but also the native tribes across the globe, as well as the rainforest, stuff like that. So Barbie going to a safari where she comes across caged animals and is confronted with people who might seem very stereotypical in their attire and garb seems weird and off nowadays, but back then that was meant to introduce children to just different things that they've never seen before. Also in the book where Pepe Gonzalez makes an appearance, where Barbie is a painter, she is selling her paintings off in an auction in London, and she there in London meets sort of like a super rich sheikh from an unknown Arab country who wants to buy all of her paintings. He's also very much depicted as a very stereotypical hodgepodge of Middle Eastern cliches, but then again, if you ever been to London and ever been to Harrods, you know that the Saudis love to shop there, so it's not really that far off. And I also wanted to highlight the appearances of Barbie's ethnic friend group, because they're very much kept to a minimum. Barbie and Skipper and Ken are sort of like the main characters of these books. You have Teresa pop up in a couple of them as well. In the 9 books that I have, the only other friend of Barbie's that makes an appearance is actually Kira, who makes an appearance in the Barbie as a Nurse book. But there's absolutely no appearance of Christy, but there's also no appearance of Mitch, so I wouldn't really say that it was malice or ill intent from the writers of these novels. They probably just would prefer to introduce new characters into the books instead of using characters that are part of the Barbie universe. I also have a ton of these retailer catalogs for Barbies from the 90s, from 1990, 1991, 1994 to the early 2000s. These Girl Stars catalog that were meant for retailers in Germany, and a lot of the Friends of Barbies were neglected to be distributed, and a lot of retailers had no chance to like order a Christie, these lines, or a Kira. So if the writers were to stick to the characters that were meant to be distributed around Northern European countries, they probably had their hands tied there. Then again, Mitch was also distributed in a lot of Northern European countries, and she was completely left out of these 9 books that I have. So again, that just shows to me that there was no ill intent or malice meant. Now, I also had read a Reddit post which made me think a lot, because that Reddit post was like, there's no need for stereotypical blonde blue-eyed Barbie anymore. Everyone is Barbie. All of the dolls distributed nowadays by Mattel under the Barbie brand of Barbie, so we should just completely erase her, which just hurt me in a way. I think inclusion is not about leaving someone out, which someone had aptly commented underneath that post on Reddit. Also, it's about the mascot, and blonde blue-eyed stereotypical Barbie is not only the mascot of Barbie the brand, she's also the mascot of Mattel in a sense. It would be like saying that Walt Disney does not need Mickey Mouse, Pokemon does not need Pikachu, Nintendo would not need Super Mario. The way these Instagram posts resonated with a lot of people by showing stereotypical blonde blue-eyed Barbie, I think, as well as the reception of Barbie the movie, showed that a lot of people have a lot of affinity for this Barbie character and a lot of love, a lot of good memories attached to her, so she'll eternally be Barbie. This was a different type of video than the usual very much doll related things that I like to do on this channel, but I hope you enjoyed it nonetheless. If you liked this video, leave a like. If you thought this video was trash, leave a dislike. I saw that YouTube had this new hype feature So if you're able to hype my video, do that. Subscribe to my channel if you have not done so already, and I might see you in my next one. So bye for now.